A lot of what I personally do is the past life regressions, soul retrievals, psychic surgeries. I'm more of like a shamanic healer. So I consider myself a quantum curandera. When we go through so much and we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing because it's what we're taught to do, there comes a breaking point. We can go and talk to a therapist for a year, but if we're not working on the nervous system, then it's still embedded and the triggers are still going to come up. And when you do this kind of work along with talk therapy, it's just so complementary.
Well, thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
After sitting in ceremony, or while we were sitting in ceremony, I felt that nudge from spirit, like, talk to her, talk to her.
As soon as I received your message, I literally cried. I was like, oh my God,
Aww.
what's happening?
So you're from Mexico City, or you live in Mexico City?
I live in Mexico City. So I'm born and raised LA.
Okay.
Yes. San Gabriel Valley is pretty much where I was raised up until 21.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to San Diego and lived there for like another 14 years. And then shit kind of hit the fan and spirit said, it's time to get up and go. And I said, okay, well, where? And it was between like the East Coast, Costa Rica, or Mexico. And they said Mexico. And I was like, really? Like, Costa Rica sounds really good. But yeah, they sent me to Mexico City and I've been there now for a year and a half.
And just like you had not been there before, or you had been there?
I had been there in 2017 and 2013, just like as a tourist, just like, I don't know, 3-4 days, and that's it.
And so you just got that nudge from spirit. They're like, go to Mexico City. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. And I packed up 4 luggages and went on my way.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's a lot of trust right there.
Yeah, it's taken me a long time, but because of the way that they have changed my life, like I don't even question it anymore.
And when you say they?
My spirit guides.
Your spirit guides.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with your background. Were you raised in any religion?
Yeah, born and raised Catholic, so
Okay.
Baptized Catholic. Right after high school, like right around high school time, I got really involved with a teen program and with the church that I used to attend. Not that my family was like every Sunday, not at all, but I was in a very abusive relationship and I needed help. And so my friend was like, you should go to this church. And it was a Christian church. And I didn't know, like, something about it didn't feel right to me. So I was like, I'm just going to go back to my church. But they had a teen mass at 5:00. And I was like, I loved it because they had like that twist of the Christian music with like the guitars and the, like just everything that Christian church really offered, but with what I felt more inclined to, which was the Catholic Church. I got really involved. I got involved in the retreats. I was doing like Wednesday prayer groups. I was serving mass, like, serving the host and the wine. And I was teaching confirmation to the teens. I was super involved. And I would say that my relationship with spirit started then because I remember in the retreats, whether I was a participant or one of the what are they called? Like the retreat core members. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Catholic Church, but there's like...
I am. I was raised Catholic as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So during adoration, we would sit around a circle and we would adore this monstrance. And every time I would go up to touch it, something just came over me. And I would cry and I would feel this like energy moving through me. Sometimes I would slay in the spirit and it just felt right to me. The teachings of the Catholic Church didn't necessarily sit well with me because I was struggling with my own sexual identity. And back then it was, still people were trying to promote legalized gay marriage. So
yeah, I can totally relate. I mean, I went through the same thing as a young Catholic, just like not understanding, like it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. Like I know who I am. and I knew that I had my own special connection and relationship with God, and I was going to church every week, and I was doing all the right things, and I was making the grade, and I was a good boy and a good student and a good son and a good brother, and like,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a very tough place to be. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
get it.
left. I loved it, but I left because I didn't feel right, especially after one of the retreats when they asked me to speak to one of the girls to have her remove her legalized gay marriage shirt.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh,
So what did you
that's,
do?
I said, I'm not going to do it. And then they said, you're leading kids away from the church, away from the Bible, away from, the belief of God. And I said, if that is what you believe, then that is okay. But this is not for me. And so,
Wow, good for you.
yeah, this was like 2008.
So what next? So what happened after that? So you had this like really strong connection with
Hmm.
spirit then.
I've always looked for it.
Hmm.
Even living in San Diego for 14 years, I found this wonderful church that was LGBT friendly, and it was very similar. They served the host and the wine, and it was very similar in setup. Um, but something still wasn't clicking. Like I still felt like I needed some type of community or like a deeper connection with spirit. And it's not that I just found spirituality because I Googled it. I mean, really, it was like my life experiences that led me to plant medicine and like what I do now for a living. So
Yeah, so let's talk about that. How did you stumble upon, well, how did you find ayahuasca and how did ayahuasca find you?
that's a great question. So 2016, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Wow.
And let me backtrack just a tad bit. 2015 was one of my like peaks of just like my depression, my anxiety, suicidal ideation, and it was the last time I actually tried to commit suicide. And that time I remember saying something needs to change. And at the end of that year, I ended up going to Costa Rica for the first time. And being within Mother Nature, those 10 days shifted something. Like I remember driving back to the airport with two of my friends that I went. We were all just driving those 5 hours in silence and each of us just crying. Like
Wow.
it was just so profound for me to be out there within this like place of nature. And being from LA, you don't get that kind of jungle experience.
Not at all.
So a year later, 2016, we're looking now at like October, and I'm experiencing headaches every single day. And like maybe a few days here and there a headache is normal, but every single day I started documenting. I said something's not
N-
right.
Right.
And it turned out to be that I went to my primary, and after 2 hours there, they sent me over to do an MRI, and I had a benign tumor on the left side of my brain. And so it's called a schwannoma. It's between my seventh and eighth cranial nerve. And so it connects to the face nerves and also the audio. So I was the reason why I found out and I decided to go to the doctor was because I just woke up one day and I had this like weird ringing in my ear and I couldn't hear very well.
Whoa.
So I was like, oh, maybe a fly got stuck in there and they just got to take it out. I was hoping, right?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
really, what happened was there was a tumor pressing between both nerves that was um, inflicting the audio and then also the nerves. So within that year of 2017, I realized that I couldn't be in social settings. I couldn't be in public places where there was loud music or even a restaurant because like the clicking of the utensils was really bothersome. I couldn't cry. I couldn't laugh. I
Oh my
couldn't
God.
vomit. I couldn't listen to music in my car. I couldn't dance anymore. I had vertigo. Like it just it spinned my life around.
I can only imagine. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, it
I mean, you're being
was.
cut off from so much joy.
Yes,
No laughter, no
nothing,
crying, no clubs, no bars, no social,
nothing.
no parties. Wow.
Yeah. But for most of my 20s, I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, you don't want to listen? We're going to make you listen.
Mm. Okay, so how old were you when you discovered that you had the brain tumor?
Let's see, like 31, 32.
Thank God it's benign.
Yes. Yeah. But I still went to multiple different types of specialists to see if I needed to do surgery. And, they were like, well, you can be on medication for your headaches because that was the thing, headaches.
Mm.
The headaches weren't going away. And so being in a social setting, the tinnitus would increase, the headaches would come in, and the headaches would last 3 to 4 days with no rest. So I'm a pretty petite person. 3 to 4 days of physical pain was excruciating, and I ended up in the hospital all the time.
Oh man.
So when my friend Sherry Villa was like, you need to go to ayahuasca, this is going to save your life. I was like, girl, I'm not going to put myself in a predicament where I'm going to end up with a headache and end up in the hospital. No. And she's like, okay, that's fine. I understand and I respect that. But can I introduce you to the spiritual community? And I was like, okay, that's fine. And we're talking like 2017.
Okay. I was going to ask what year this was.
Yeah, 2017. And she sent me the Instagram for Shireen Jaharian. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. Like just everything that she was into. And fast forward 2020, the pandemic starts. I lose my job and now I have no insurance.
Oh my God.
So how do I end up in a hospital with no insurance and during a pandemic?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's the worst nightmare.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that level of pain, and it was onset all the time. It was scary. And I saw that Shireen posted that her sister was going to be teaching Reiki. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me try that. Cool. And I did. And we're talking May 2020. And, by now I'm like on unemployment and figuring out like, well, what's the world going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
And I joined her class and it was Holy Fire Reiki. And it was so beautiful. I mean, just the energy that Rana has. She's my first Reiki master. She's just like this beautiful light, just like Shireen.
I love Shireen.
They're
Shout out Shireen.
Yeah, between I don't think they understand like how much between Sherry, Shireen, and Rana, they changed my life.
That's incredible.
Like everything just connected. And as soon as I started doing Reiki, I noticed something was different. But I didn't understand it because I didn't fully understand Reiki. I just knew that in the class, my hands would get warm and tingly as I was like practicing on people. But what really caught my eye was the fact that I was seeing things when I was practicing on people. And granted, I mean, we're in the pandemic, so everything's virtual.
Right. So you're doing this at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know you could practice Reiki at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're just going into the ethers. It's all multidimensional.
Can you do a quick summary of what Reiki is for those who aren't familiar with it? What is Reiki?
Yeah, Reiki is the universal life force. We all carry it. And when we get activated into it, we become the vessel. We become just a hollow bone. And through us, Reiki just beams through us. With our hands, we move it through the body. We begin to look through the actual physical body or the energetic body that we're working on to see where the blockages are, so that you know where exactly to move the energy through. If there's any entities, attachments, then you know where to pull them from, things like that. And it really just helps with depression, anxiety. It helps with your nervous system and really just shifts people. And I always tell people, the least that you're going to get out of Reiki is that you're going to have better sleep. I mean, who doesn't want better sleep?
I can imagine. Okay, so I'm so curious. I'm so interested. So you're taking this class and you start seeing things?
Well, this is the thing. There was a few people in the class and everyone's like, yeah, my hands got warm and tingly and so forth. And I'd share, but I felt like I was overshared. I felt like I was taking up space because I'm like, yeah, my hands got tingly and so forth. But I noticed that like the little girl was standing behind the door and she was like holding her teddy and like the parents were arguing and, there was like alcohol involved. And I was like, why isn't anyone else sharing what they're seeing? I didn't know that like I had a gift to see beyond my own reality.
And that wasn't for you like, whoa, this is out of the ordinary?
No, I just thought everyone had that.
Like everyone was seeing.
Yeah. So I was like, why aren't they sharing?
Gotcha.
And I guess maybe I was like too shy to say like, why aren't you guys sharing? Because maybe they didn't want to, I
Right.
don't know. And
Yeah.
I was very naive to it.
So what next?
Well, I think Rana, after, I think I may have spoken to her and I said, why isn't anyone sharing?
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, it's normal for people to have these kinds of openings after getting Reiki attunements, but it usually takes time. And you're just like full blown, like running with it, And so she said, I don't have the ability to like see the way that you do, or, I like to call it perceive.
Mhm.
She doesn't perceive the way that I was perceiving or hearing spirit and things like that. So she's like, here's a book called The Art of Psychic Reiki by Lisa Campion. Read it, and if it resonates, then go from there. Oh my gosh, I read it and I was like, who is this lady? Take me to her.
You resonated with everything that she was saying.
Everything. And so I contacted this Lisa Campion lady. She has a school for psychics. So I took her apprenticeship. So I'm considered now a psychic master healer under her program. I took it for almost 2 years and it just like changed my life.
Okay, flesh that out. Tell me more about that. So what does that mean to be a psychic? What is a psychic
Master
healer?
hmm Well, there's all kinds of different things that I
Okay.
can do. And I think that's the beauty of her school, that you can be a psychic and you can be a healer and you can master multiple different modalities and use them all in one healing. It just depends, it's kind of like you allow yourself to flow and allow spirit to do whatever is needed for the client. I've worked with clients as young as 9 years old and as old as 94. So the 94-year-old lady, I'm also considered a death doula. So I helped her cross over during the time where like they give them a few months to live. A lot of what needs to happen is, clearing out the chakras, any residual trauma, and then closing the chakras so that their spirit, their soul is able to easily leave the body when it's their time to cross over. That has been really beautiful to witness because it's not only healing for that person who's crossing over, but also for the family, as they're receiving messages and a confirmation that their loved one has crossed over.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you were with her while she crossed. So a death doula is you're there to support them through their transition, right?
Yeah.
Can you see them leaving their bodies? Can you feel that they've crossed into the light? Or can you recognize if they're kind of still stuck here? Has that
So
happened?
I've done some where I literally see them as they're leaving, like actively leaving, and I've done others where they're in the process of. I said, in the next 3 weeks they'll be crossing, and it's pretty accurate. It's very nerve-wracking because it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But I haven't been wrong so far, and so that's really cool. But yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff.
That is pretty amazing. So like you can pinpoint like within the next 3 weeks they are going to transition.
If it's their time, yes.
If it's their time.
Yeah, because I've also had people that have reached out and they're like, oh, my so-and-so was diagnosed with cancer and so forth. If it's not their time, if it's not within the next like 3 months, I can't see it. It has to be within 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So normally the people who have called me for these kinds of services, it's because like they're on their deathbed. The doctor's like, okay, they're on their last hours, their last days kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's just one of the things I do.
Okay. So yeah, I want to hear about it all.
A lot of what I personally do that I'm very comfortable with because my soul has done it so much is the past life regressions, soul retrievals, psychic surgeries. I'm more of like a shamanic healer. So I consider myself a quantum curandera because curanderas are very much about doing limpias with eggs and herbs and things like that. But I work in the quantum. So being that I'm always on the other dimensions doing the limpias and bringing back those fragmented soul pieces, sewing them back up into the soul, like all of those beautiful things are the things that they teach us in the class, but it may not resonate for all of us. And for me, I was like, oh my God, now I have a name for it. That stuff I've been doing all along, I can now put a name for it. Whereas other people in the class were like, oh yeah, no, I'm not touching that. It's not for me.
Not for them, but for you, yes.
Yeah.
So Olympia is a cleansing, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're doing it non-locally. You're doing it in the astral
Yeah.
realm.
I can have the person in front of me, and that's beautiful because, I do work with crystals. I'm certified crystal practitioner. And, the person that's in front of me gets to experience the heat in the hands, the vibrations, the crystals, the aromas. But you can also experience something very similar when we're not working in person. And honestly, like 80-90% of my clients, I work virtually.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And they notice improvements and
yeah, I mean, all kinds of things. I think the best one, I worked on someone who was a very religious man, and he had just injured his ankle. And I said, let me just do a quick healing on your ankle. And he said to me, that was so weird. I just felt like this warmth come up my leg, and it was this tingly, and then I could walk.
wow.
It's like, great. Then it worked.
That's so cool. And he found you being a religious man.
Well, he was a relative of my friend.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I think for me, the most amazing stories of the people that I worked with, they come in so many different ways. Like I said, I work with children, teenagers, women of all ages, men of all ages. It's really just about like who's ready to do the work, who's tired, who's really getting tired. Like when we go through so much and we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing because it's what we're taught to do, there comes a breaking point. There comes a point where like I've done it all. I've gone to therapy. I go to the gym. I do all these things for myself. But the mental health, we can go and talk to a therapist for a year. But if we're not working on the nervous system, then it's still embedded. And the triggers are still going to come up. And when you do this kind of work along with talk therapy, it's just so complementary and it just works differently.
Right. The issue is in the tissue.
Right? I love that.
Yeah, I learned that when I went to healing school a few years ago and learned how we get trauma trapped in our body.
Yeah.
Not everybody has access to a healer. What can they do at home, or how can they heal themselves?
I think that's the beautiful thing about Reiki, that you can heal yourself with Reiki. I think for me, the most profound moment, before I even started working with clients, I was on top of a mountain in Big Bear camping, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and we set up camp, and I had no medication, no cannabis, like nothing to help me with my physical pain. And my partner at the time was like, aren't you doing that Reiki thing? Like, do your thing with your hands. And I was like, oh yeah. And within 20 minutes, I have very high tolerance for pain because of my tumor. Within 20 minutes, I felt like it was melting away. And I'm telling you, like, I used to take all kinds of medications. I used to smoke like 2 to 3 joints to like help just numb the pain. And even that wouldn't help. I'd end up in the hospital. So for my hands alone to melt away pain from like an 8 to a 2 within 20 minutes, I was like, whoa.
That's amazing.
That's what really got me into this, because I said, if I can heal myself, can you imagine what I can do for others? And really that was my motivation. Physical pain for me is my kryptonite. And I was like, if I can help myself, I can help other people. And that's what, I have not stepped into a hospital since 2021. And I have ayahuasca to thank for that.
So what was your first ayahuasca experience like?
My first and second sitting was with a Colombian shaman. It was actually on Halloween night on a full moon. Yeah, it was beautiful.
That sounds incredible.
It was incredible.
Wow.
But, it was my first ceremony and I didn't know what to expect, obviously. And now that I know the difference, that was I believe they call it a loose container, where people just like walk around and like, they're not like in their seat necessarily.
But there's no talking.
Right. There's no talking, but you get to roam.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you roam like in the same space, or do people go off in other rooms, or like
we were like in a farm?
Okay.
So we were in the barn, when we took the medicine and we had our seats.
Mm-hmm.
But if the medicine spoke to you and said, go outside, go to the fire, go whatever, like you could.
Wow.
And in that situation, I was able to heal a lot of past lives. So like I saw myself being burned at the stake and things like that. Sexual abuse that I had gone through, understanding like all of that and the forgiveness aspect of it, and family dynamics, things like that. Yeah. So my second ceremony, I am sitting with Pachamama, and my intention was to release this brain tumor that was invading my life for the last 5 years. And that was a psychic surgery, definitely very painful physically in my body. She presented herself as a spider, and she crawled through my left nostril. I could feel her going between like my skin and my bone, just like.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. So bizarre. And she immediately got to the brain tumor, and it's as if she was just like tearing.
Whoa, was it painful?
So painful. Like, so painful. I remember thinking, like, I just want this to be over. I don't want this anymore. I just want it to be over. And I was crying, and I still surrendered to it because I knew that she knew better than I did.
Right. She always does.
Yeah. And I remember on the way home, it was 4 of us, Sherry being included. And one of, for like the first 45 minutes, we're just kind of like, oh my God, what happened with everyone's story. And then once we get on the road, she's one of our friends, she says, put music on. I was like, oh no, girl, I don't listen to music in my car. And she's like, what? And I'm explaining to her how I end up with headaches. She's like, you just told us this amazing story of how Pachamama just tore up that entire tumor, put on music. And I was like, all right. And so I'm like, barely putting on the volume. And she's like, raise the volume. And I did. And I probably went about an hour to drop them off to the airport. And I was like, okay, all right, this is different.
Whoa.
But the real test for me was driving from Arizona all the way to San Diego, which was a 4-hour drive. And I was like, I'm going to blast my Mexican music. That's the real test. And I drove 4 hours blasting music, singing at the top of my lungs with absolutely no pain.
Are you kidding me?
And I can now listen to music and dance and sing and cry and vomit and do all the things.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
A spider came into your brain.
Yep.
And ate your tumor, and now you're back to normal.
For the most part.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah, I still have hearing, not hearing. I still have hearing loss.
Uh-huh.
I still, the tumor is still there, but it doesn't invade my life the way that it used to.
God, ayahuasca is so magical.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I hear people's stories like, this thing came through me, I'm like, yes, that's what you want. You want her to come and there's been other times where she became this huge anaconda and just swallowed me whole. Whoa. And I just surrendered to it.
And what do you think that lesson was? Or what happened there? What was the healing? Do you know? Well,
I was releasing black magic that had been in my family dynamic. And I needed a full on, just shedding.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've seen a lot of really beautiful things in ayahuasca, also a lot of scary things. But what I've learned is that the more you surrender and the more that you're open to seeing the quote unquote scary things, you always end up with a beautiful gift at the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mind is blown by your healing. That is such a beautiful story.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I had a moment, I've had a couple, but one very profound. experience with ayahuasca. And I was already it was towards the end of ceremony, and I saw an orb, this magical, beautiful, like orb just grow from a tea light in the bathroom. And it started pulsating. And it was at a point when I was at my lowest point. And I was not sure what to do. I didn't like, there was just so much, there were so many layers. And I was rock bottom. And this orb came in an instant, my pain, my suffering, all of that was gone. I knew who I was. I knew where I was going. I knew that everything and everywhere always is okay. And it was just like a remembering of who I really was. And in that moment, it was like that awareness that God, whatever God is real, and that we are part of that. And it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. And so I can completely relate to you and your story and the magic and the beauty that this plant medicine, the spirit of this plant, gives us if we bow to it and like you said, let go and allow and trust.
Yeah. For me, it's like the reverence that you have towards the medicine. And, even in my practice, I know it's not me, it's them, and I may not be considered Catholic, but I still work with Jesus and Mary and the saints and the angels and my spirit guides and my power animals and like all of them. Like it's them that are doing the work through me, and I always tell people Jesus was a man. He walked this earth and he healed people with his hands. What makes you feel like you can't do the same thing for yourself or others? We are all part of God. It's like my mentor always said this thing where, the ocean is the ocean. But if you get a cup and you take a cup of the ocean and give it to someone, you said, here's the ocean. They're going to say, that's not the ocean. That's a cup of water. And that's us. They take us out of heaven from God and they put us on this earth and like, that's not God.
Yes.
We are God.
We are.
We are. We just have to believe it. That's been like my hardest thing, to be honest, because
it's so easy to forget.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Yeah. Because our ego,
Yeah.
Our ego's like, you? Okay.
Right. And then this world is so hard to navigate. And then the ego is there to kind of protect us in this world and to keep us safe. So it's like our best friend at times. And at other times, it's like, dude, what are you doing? It's like, it's that constant battle. So yeah, it's just clearing your mind and your heart and getting in alignment and taking that breath and just remembering who we really are is
coming back to
important.
Center.
Yes, coming back to center.
Yeah.
What's your spiritual practice? Do you have like something that you do daily to get into alignment?
I like to really just connect with my guides, like going in to get answers, understanding what is it that they want me to do, how they want me to do it. I listen. And sometimes I don't want to listen because I don't want to do the things they want me to do, which are never bad, but it's just like, but they know better than I, so.
I think it's so cool that you have such clarity around your guides and what they're telling you.
Yeah.
I long for that, and I know that there's whispers. Like I definitely feel the communication come through. And it's very subtle for me. It comes through signs and symbols, synchronicities where it's just like, okay, I get it. I know. And I guess the grass is always greener. But it just sounds so cool to like, as you said, like your guides told you to move to Mexico City.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so part of what I've noticed in working with all types of clients is that I tend to have all of these witches that don't know are witches or wizards. And the more healing you do, the more that these skills develop. So I first started just doing Reiki, and then I started doing deeper healing. And in the deeper healing, I noticed that their psychic abilities were starting to kick in, and I started to do psychic development coaching because it's so important. Even if you don't want to be a healer, for you to develop your psychic skills, just to listen to spirit, just to listen to your guides. Who are your guides? Like we all have our individual guides, and you're here for a reason, and they're very specific to you for a reason as well. Regardless of your job, regardless of what you do, to be able to connect with them, whether you're clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, whatever. There's 8 clairs. I have 4 out of the 8. You might have 4 out of the 8 too. We just have to develop them.
That's true. Can you explain the different clairs?
Yeah. So I am clairvoyant, which is clear seeing or perception. Clairaudient, audio. So I hear spirit very loud and clear.
You actually hear.
So clairaudient is almost as if it were a thought. And that's why it can be confusing, because it's like, oh, I just thought about that. And it's like, no, because you probably wouldn't have even used that word in your regular vocabulary. Or sometimes it has a different tone, or it could be more like a masculine tone or a feminine tone. Or for me, like, for example, when Pachamama speaks to me, she always calls me my darling.
Oh.
Like, I don't call myself my darling.
Right.
So for those who have sat with Mother and they have heard her stern but gentle tug, like, that's her. That's not your thoughts,
Yeah.
So it's similar to that. But you just have to listen silently. So they're clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. In Spanish, sentir is to feel. So I'm clairsentient, but I'm also a physical psychic, which means that I can feel the emotion of the person in my body, but I can also feel the physical pain of the person that I'm working on through my body.
Oh, that must be rough.
It is. Yeah. So it really helps to have training so that I know how to clear these energies out of my body after I'm done working. How to protect myself is key before going in. How to clear myself after coming out is key. All of those things are so important, because when I don't, I get physically very sick.
Wow. I was going to ask, so like at the end of the day, are you just drained energetically?
No.
Because you ground.
Yeah. It's so important to really make that strong bubble of protection, whether it's, I have layers and layers and layers of protection. And one of the things that I've learned in creating my protection before going into sessions is that I just allow my guides to protect me as much as I need. And I've learned that certain ways that they protect me are indications of this person I'm about to work on is going to have an entity attached to them, and they're having extra protection for me.
And you can see the entities, entity attachments. I have another friend.
Yeah.
She sees them sometimes. She'll see faces. And is that how you experience it?
There's different types of entities. There's smart ones and not very smart ones. There's jumpers. There's shapeshifters. All kinds of different types. I've come across most of them. And the one that really got me good was the shapeshifter.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I had been working on a client. I think this may have been like the 4th or 5th session. I did 15 of them total on him. And I remember he had mentioned that he had done cocaine for many years of his life. And I tend to find that people who have done any type of like synthetic drugs tend to have more entities attached to them.
Wow.
But because it had been so far, like so many years past, I didn't think of scanning for entities. I don't know. That was probably my mistake.
Yeah.
And so part of my practice in the ethers, I have a curandera. Her name is Consuelo. And she's just this like old woman, maybe in her 80s, salt and pepper hair. And her right-hand man is a rattlesnake. And her name is Cascabel, which is rattlesnake. And Consuelo came forward, but I could only see her back. And I've seen her back, obviously, but something said, something's different. And when she went like this and looked at me, it was a different face. And I immediately knew that it wasn't her.
Whoa.
And I just brought in all my tools, like my rattles and my crystals and just like everything that I know that I can use for an entity removal. But it attached to me and attached right in my heart.
No way.
And it was probably attached to me for 3 weeks.
So it left the person and came to you.
Yeah.
How did you know
Yeah.
it was attached to you?
I was depressed and suicidal, and not suicidal, but I was having like, suicidal ideation. I was really depressed and just sad and just physically like couldn't work. And I just knew something was up. And I ended up bruising, like green bruising, like all in my heart. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, when it's stuff like that, it wasn't the first time that something like that has happened, but they're all lessons of bigger protection, stronger protection, and even more clearing and grounding and like taking the time. So usually my sessions are about an hour, but I dedicate about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how much protection I need to do prior and how much clearing I have to do after and grounding.
Wow.
Yeah. So I only see about 3 clients a day. I can't do more than that. It's too much.
I can imagine. Like
Yeah.
3 sounds like a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me ask you about that one entity. How is that manifesting in that man's life? How is it showing up?
That's a great question, because this man initially came. So in Mexico City, I no longer have this office, but I had an office. And he came looking for a podiatrist that was in the same building. And he was very curious of like my drum and my rattle and, whatever I had in there. And he's like, what do you do? And so when it's someone that's just like off the streets, I don't want to scare them off.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, it's for physical pain. And he's like, oh, I just had this like surgery in my groin like a year ago and I'm still not okay. And he had lost so much weight and he thought maybe it's the food and maybe it's this and maybe it's that. So he had changed his entire lifestyle because he couldn't pinpoint the problem. So after I don't know how many sessions, he realized that it was all like not just the entity that had attached to him, but also everything that he had been through in his past lives were really affecting him.
Wow.
Because he had been a drug lord
In a past life?
in a past life. And so to him, at first I didn't know how to tell him, like the things that I was seeing from his past lives. But when I told him, he's like, that makes so much sense. He's like, I had a gun by the age of 12 and I was totally comfortable with that. And I was like, oh.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he was like,
Wow.
I grew up in a really rough neighborhood in Mexico City and I rolled with a lot of really deep people. And so a lot of his mindset was all of this wrong that I've done. How can I clear it out of my body? How can I clear it out of my mind? How can I clear it out of my soul? So although he wasn't necessarily a believer coming into it, he was a total believer coming out of it because he was just a completely different man. And, now he's gained all his weight. He's finally back 100% back at work. And it's just beautiful to see like the shifts and changes in him.
That's incredible. You're the real deal.
Thank you.
What is the wildest experience you've had with a client or with yourself with spirit?
When I first started, I hadn't even gone to any kind of schooling other than like just Reiki. But again, I think it's profound because my soul is familiar. My soul knows what to do already, I'm just allowing it to happen and I'm just educating myself on what I'm doing. But it was this man, this was maybe like within the first 10 people, like the first 10 clients that I had ever worked on. So I was just kind of like on donation base and practicing on friends and family. So my cousin's wife was like, hey, my father is very sick in Mexico. I was still living in San Diego at the time. He's very sick and I would love for you to do a session for him. And I said, okay, well, I'd like to speak to him and, just get his authorization. Oh, well, he actually is bedridden. So I was just wondering if you can do this. Okay, no worries. Can I at least get permission from his wife?
Mm.
And in his session, what I saw was this little boy about 8 years old, and he was just like in a pool of blood and inside of a barn around horses. And I see the children, I call them the children, which is our inner child. I see the children a lot. And he came forward, and when he first came to me, he just kind of looked at me. He didn't say a word, and he went like this to my face 3 times. And he said he was sad because he couldn't get on horses anymore because they weren't playing music, and he wanted to listen to, he's mentioned a specific like Mexican artist, and he didn't get beans anymore. And I was like, okay, I'll give them a message. Like random, right?
Yeah, so random.
Yeah. So I'm on the phone with technically his daughter. And the moment I said about the hand, she starts crying. She's like crying hysterically. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I tell her everything that comes forward. And she says, my father has like a bacterial infection in his brain, and he lost his memory. He's bedridden, and he can only remember his life from when he was 8 years old and younger. When you show him pictures of his wife and kids, he doesn't know who they are. But if you show him pictures of him as a child or his parents, he knows who they are. And she said, because he's bedridden and he can't speak, we stopped playing music for him because we didn't know if it bothered him. And he loves Johann Sebastian, so that's who he was asking for. He's like, and we don't give him beans because the doctor said that there's like some type of complication with something going on with his belly, and we don't give him beans anymore. And I was like, oh, I was like, well, what about the horses? And then he's like, well, when he lived in Mexico and he was young, he was a musician, and he'd ride his horse from like pueblo to pueblo to bring music to his community. I said, well, play the man some music, play Johann Sebastian, give the man some beans.
Let him eat his beans.
And within 2 weeks, she called me and she's like, my dad's walking. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, my dad's walking. And I was like, whoa. Like, that was great. Like, I'm getting just like hot just thinking about it. And she said, I think within a month, she said, we're going to take him to Chicago to see his sibling or his children. And we're going to bring him to California to see his other kids. And what was happening is that he still wasn't remembering who they were, but they would sing to him. And so they were having this ongoing conversation through music, and they were singing, and he was singing again, and they were singing to him, and they were communicating with him. And I actually met him in Chicago, and, you know, he looked like he was kind of like a child, you know, just like you would speak to him and it was like speaking to a child. And he did die maybe like 6 months later. But, you know, it was that story that I was like, this man, I had no idea who he was, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I got him out of this bed that he probably would have died in. And it's that story that I was like, I need to keep going. I need to keep doing this. I need to keep finding answers.
How can you not?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up.
I can't. I really can't. You know, and the beauty of my work is that I've either recorded all of my sessions or I have like everything I had written. So I have all of these stories just written down, and
I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Journal these moments.
Yeah. And honestly, like as I'm speaking of this, I'm thinking, I have multiple teens that I've worked with because of sexual assault. And I remember a father that came to me. I mean, this family would bring their daughter to me. They would drive 2 hours every other weekend to bring her to me. And they would pay me full price. I gave a 30% discount to multiple types of communities to make it affordable. But he was paying me full price and driving these 2 hours. And I remember the day he said, with tears in his eyes, and he said, you don't know the desperation of a father when I see my daughter trying to feed herself and her spoon is shaking up to her mouth. And I don't know what you do and I don't understand it, but you have changed my daughter. And for that, I am grateful. And You know, like it's those stories that really just like I cry every time and I just
Yeah.
keep going. I just keep doing it.
What a gift. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Uh,
And it hasn't been easy, you know, like
Yeah.
I have my own struggles and my own like what am I doing and why am I doing this? And I don't have a full on online presence yet, you know, and that was part of this ayahuasca that I just sat with. Like help me lose this fear of being seen.
Yes. Girl, you need a online presence. Let's get you some people. Oh my
So when you
God.
said, "Hey, this is going to be my February podcast," I was like, "Yes, I'm coming on the 12th of February."
Yes. That's incredible. I'm so happy that this all worked out.
I think that's why when you reached out for the podcast, I got so emotional because I asked for this and Pachamama put you right
This
in front.
I'm telling you, I felt the nudge.
You know, my first ayahuasca ever, I remember coming out of the barn and I was like, what is happening right now? And this girl with red hair just approached me and she said, hey, I don't know why we need to talk or why we are supposed to meet, but here's my number. Let's connect. And she's one of my best friends now.
Wow.
She is my soul sister. I adore her. She is this beautiful soul. We have had multiple lifetimes together. We've been warrior together. Like she is like a ride and die. And, you know, it's always those like moments where you're like nudging and you're like, yes, that
Yeah.
you just never know where that's going to go.
You never know. Switching gears
Yeah.
a little bit. On our way up here, we were talking about alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
I'm doing dry January, so I haven't had anything to drink all month. And it's been really great. Like I've been in social, situations and where my friends were drinking and like I didn't care to drink. Um, but every now and then, like I want a glass of wine, I want a margarita, go to a Mexican restaurant, like come on, with the chips, you need a margarita, you know? But I'm thinking like, um, am I cutting myself self off from spirit? Like if
Mm,
I drink, if I at the same time it's like I think I have a really healthy relationship with alcohol. I don't abuse it. And I honestly don't like to drink a lot because I get really bad hangovers. And I think that's
mhm.
a good thing because it like protects me. But I don't like the way that I feel the next day. Even sometimes with two drinks, even with wine, sometimes I'll have two glasses of wine
Yeah.
and be like hungover the next day. Um, but I'm in this place now where I'm like, should I keep going? And like my friends having a brunch on Sunday and it's going to be February. And I'm like, should I have a mimosa? And I'm like, kind of like beating myself up
Mm.
over it. I don't know what I should do. Like, I want to be this like clear channel and vessel for spirit. But at the same time, like this other part of me is like, well, I want to experience joy and like connection with my friends as well. And sometimes you drink together. So what are your thoughts on that? Would like am I messing myself up by
Mm.
drinking?
That's a great question. I think that it's very personalized too,
Mhm.
because I once had a very strong relationship with alcohol. And that's one of the reasons why, at times, when I kind of beat myself down and I'm like, who am I to do this work? You know, I know the things I've done in my past.
Yeah.
You know, I get myself out of the way and I'm like, who am I to hold my soul back from doing this work?
Amen. Yes.
And when I first started, definitely they were loud and clear, no more alcohol. And I stopped drinking for 2 years fully. And that's huge because I would drink like 5 days out of the week.
Yeah.
And it was never like in a way to black out. It was more of like, you know, I was a very shy kid. I think after going through sexual violence for 10 plus years of my childhood, alcohol was my escape.
For sure.
It was how I numbed my pain. But it was a combination of like drinking and dancing. Like it
Mm,
was never just drinking,
right.
you know? Um, and for me, I know that it became wrong, even if I wasn't like blacking out, because I was using alcohol partying and sex as like a combo. That was like my cocktail.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they said no more alcohol, I knew why.
Right.
Because I wasn't using it in any way that was productive to me.
Mm.
And with all of these clairs that were showing up for me, I mean, granted, I also went 5 years without even being able to really get out of my house with the brain tumor, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, what if it's just like a glass of wine with friends
Mm.
or, just a cocktail with, at a bar with friends? Now at this point, I don't prefer it because I know that it fogs my clairvoyance, or just in general, like it fogs my connection
Mhm.
with spirit. So I know, and I say this to my friends and my partner, if I'm going to drink, I need to make sure that I don't have a client on my schedule for the next 2 to 3 days because
Wow.
I need to fully be like a clear vessel.
Mhm.
So I'll literally look at my calendar and I say, "Oh, no, I have a client. I can't drink. I'll have a mocktail."
Right.
But if not, and if I know like it's Thursday, I don't have a client on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, maybe till Monday, I might have like 3 to 4 drinks,
Yeah, okay.
But it's very controlled for
Yeah.
me. And I really don't drink. And whenever I do, it's maybe like one or two, like I said. And I don't have that like desire to keep up with my friends, like, oh, another round, another round. And it's like, no, I'm okay. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
have some sparkling water,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that.
I'm there
So
too. Yeah. There's a point where I hit, I'm like,
yeah.
I'm done. I'm so done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like I said, it's a very personal
Right.
relationship
Yeah.
because alcohol does shed your auric field, your
Mm.
aura. And ultimately your aura is your protection.
Yeah.
Like your chakras are wide open, your aura is completely beaming and like booming, and it's like your repellent.
Right.
So, you know, ch- cannabis also sheds your aura, but not in the same way that alcohol does. So, you kind of have to just up
Yeah.
your protection, up your grounding,
Mhm.
and make sure that you are very, very clear in your intentions of why it is that you're drinking.
That all makes sense. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Have you had any experiences with non-human intelligence, UFOs, anything like that? I'm at this place now where I've just kind of been on this like kick because of what I experienced in ceremony, with the orb. I saw it as God, right?
Mm.
Or an angel or something. And I read Diana Pasulka's book. She's a religious scholar from the University of North Carolina. And she, doing research on Catholicism and religion, ended up on this path now where she's writing books about UFOs because they go hand in hand, looking at, going to the Vatican and looking at these saints and people who have had these experiences with angels are very similar experiences to what people are experiencing now with UFOs
Mm.
and aliens.
Mm.
Um, are they the same? It's sounding like a lot of it is the same. There's another guy by the name of Chris Bledsoe who sees orbs all of the time, and he's like the most documented, respected, trusted experiencer. He's followed by the CIA, the DoD, NASA. Scientists all over the world are studying him, and he's got pictures with all these people. He's written a book, and like he's vetted by a lot of people who their careers would go to shit if they were supporting someone that was a fraud. So his experience with these orbs is that they're spiritual beings.
Mhm.
I feel like we're very close to disclosure and things coming to the surface. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that or experiences.
um, I'll be honest, I don't know too much about it
Okay.
or have had too many experiences, but I have had some experiences. Um, one of them being at this most recent ayahuasca that I met you in.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I remember when I first saw them in the ceremony, I questioned, like, is that an alien? And I was like, that's not an alien. And they all looked at me like, "Ah, how dare you ask if we're aliens or not? Like, yes, we're aliens." And they looked like what your typical alien would look like, but they weren't scary.
Like little gray beings with
No, they were
big
more
eyes.
like tall beings, like a tall silhouette body, like a human body-ish, but the face was very much like an alien. The head was very much like an alien. And so ultimately what they were doing is I was like in an OR room, and they like laid me down and they did a psychic surgery.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I didn't know if I should share with others until I think it was another participant that was like, "Did you see aliens?" I'm like, "Yes, did you see aliens?" And then another one was like, "I saw it too." And so I was like, "Okay, I'm not crazy."
Wow.
And now that we're talking about it, as you were just speaking, I was like, "Wait a minute, I've seen them before." I did with another mentor. I did a meditation where they led us to the altar of our soul. And that meditation was just beautiful because, we have our own personal altars at home, but, certain things that resonate for us. And when I saw the altar of my soul, it was just full of instruments. And I'm not very musical. Like, I don't play any instruments. I don't sing any of that yet.
Yet.
I mean, I now have a drum and like a rain. What is it called? The rain.
The rain stick?
The rain stick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And a sound bath, things like that. I do. But there was like a lot of different instruments. But before I could even touch them, there was these two beings that were standing next to the altar. And one of them was like blue and the other one was green. And they weren't like this kind of green. It was more of like a light, like a light.
Mm.
And I couldn't see their faces. It was just a silhouette of a body. And they were very much like aliens. And there was these two doors. They were guarding the doors. So there was two doors next to the altar. And they had to do like a cleansing for me to go in through those doors. And they looked very much like the aliens that I saw in the ayahuasca. And ultimately what they're doing is that they're clearing you, removing you of any energies that don't serve you. They're programming you with frequencies that are going to resonate with what's coming for you, like moving forward. And in that specific meditation, it was really beautiful because I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because I remember, I have names for all of my guides. I have about 23 guides.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I was like, "What are your names?" And they're like, "We don't have a name." I said, "Well, how am I supposed to call you forward when I need you?" And I saw them like talking amongst themselves, like telepathically. And then they're like, "Fine, Bob and Joe." I'm like, "Really?" Bob and Joe? Like, they're like, "Well, you want a name? Here, we'll give you the most simple human
Bob
name."
And
So Bob and Joe did this like full on clearing. And I remember they said, "Do you need another one?" And I like sat with myself for a second. I said, "Yes." I still didn't feel worthy to walk in through that door. Like something just didn't feel right. And so they did more of a limpia together. And I just remember this like blue and green light just like twirling around me, like, and flushing. And when I finally walked in through the door, it's as if I walked into a circus to the center of the circle, and the lights were just beaming on me. And I looked at the audience and I could see the people sitting in the audience, but behind each person were their shadows, or what people like to call their demons. I like to call them shadows. All kinds. And they weren't scary to me. They looked scary, but they weren't scary to me. And I specifically remember that it was them that was speaking to me. And they said, "We give reverence to you. And we ask for your help because these humans are keeping us captive.
Oh, wow.
We don't belong to them, but they're so afraid to let us go. Help us." And they all just like bowed to me. And I was like, whoa, that was crazy. Because these shadows, quote unquote, demons that people like to call them, they're just pain. They're pain sitting in people's souls, and they're just so done with being in this captive body. And, that's what I do. I release these shadows from people's physical body, energetic body, with the help of these aliens, these spirits, whether it's Jesus, Mary, or the aliens. Like, it's a higher consciousness. It is beings that have an intelligence that is far beyond the human intelligence. And when you really surrender to the work that they do, things shift, like our understanding is different, and maybe even just to hear like they're programming us. People may question like, oh, what are they programming you to? But I don't know, but it's definitely getting me to a higher frequency and a deeper understanding of our existence.
Everything you say is just like, wow.
Hmm.
Do you have any final words for the audience?
To really lean into their pain,
Mm.
to not wait until your pain has consumed your body, because your pain will consume your body in ways where they will manifest into physical disease. And everything that we experience, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical, is the way that your soul is trying to speak to you. And when we are afraid to really lean into the unknown, into the shadows, into our pain, it's what keeps us trapped. And ultimately, our journey is our own journey, and we can live and die and just do it all over again. I always see this life as like a Nintendo game.
Mm.
Like you can reach all the way up to the castle.
Yep.
And sometimes we'll reach maybe to, like the third level. And when we die, like we don't have to start at the beginning again, right?
Yeah.
But some people do. And that's
Yeah.
okay. But learn from it and dive into like those shadow aspects of ourselves. Dive into the pain, because when we don't, something is going to knock you down. And, I always tell people, you're going to hate me until you need me.
Mm.
And when you need me, it's when you've hit rock bottom. And I hope I don't meet you at rock bottom, but it'll definitely be a shift in you where you're going to be like, I'm ready. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to get rid of this sadness, of this depression, of this anxiety, of these suicidal ideations, of this sexual trauma that, like, just this shadow that follows me around. And when they're ready and when they're tired, that's when we get to work.
And where can people find you?
My website is pizlahealing.com. Pizla, Pizla. Pizla is the name to my soul. When my soul was born, it was named Pizla, which is a fairy.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
So Pizla Healing, I feel like her and I do the work together along with all of our spirit guides. So pizlahealing.com. And on Instagram, I am Jules Pizla.
Perfect. And I'll put all of that in the description. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's
Such a pleasure. My heart is wide open, and I am so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good week.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.